Good evening, everyone, and a very warm welcome to all of you on the behalf of the entire Science Media Center IISER Pune team. First of all, very much thank you to all of you for turning up today for today's event. And as the last scientist for today's game on Damsharas was C.V. Raman. So, as most of us know that we celebrate the Science Day to mark the discovery of Raman effect, which took place 95 years from today. But C.V. Raman has made several other significant contributions to science as well, apart from the Raman effect also. One of them being the ecosystem that he has built in terms of his students. The scientific ecosystem he has created in terms of several students. So one of those students is G.N. Ramachandran, and C.V. Raman once said that G.N. Ramachandran is probably one of his most brilliant students. So today, on the occasion of Science Day, we will celebrate the life and science of one of the most impactful Indian scientists, that is G.N. Ramachandran, as you all can see. So before we go ahead with the documentary screening, I would like to know how many of you already know about G.N. Ramachandran or the Ramachandran plot that he developed. Okay, you know about the plot. So, if two or three people can quickly tell what all you know about the Ramchandran plot or GN Ramchandran.
So basically, it predicts and gives us a map, which is basically a phase space of angles, which a dipeptide or a tripeptide, which is so amino acids combine to make peptides, to peptide bond.
And they can exist in a conformational space. So the angles which will be there through the different bonds which are involved. The Ramachandran plot allows us to restrict or narrow down that space to some regions which are sterically allowed for a di or tripeptide to be present. The different angles. So x-axis is psi and y-axis is phi. I don't exactly remember if it was a CN or CC bond which is which, but yeah, that's the overall gist of it.
Okay. So, my next question is how many of you know the story behind why he developed this Ramchandran plot? Anyone? Okay. So, have you watched the documentary before or you?
Not the,
Okay. Okay.
yeah, it's because of the collagen. Collagen is a triple helix structure. It was found out separately by GNR and another scientist. So there was a dispute regarding the correct structure of the collagen triple helix. So to prove or disprove his thing, he came up with this Ramchandran plot. So from that, we plot and we can find out how correct our model is to the expected triple helix.
Okay, very nice. So, to find out more about what was the story that actually went in the development of the Ramchandran plot, and to know more about the dispute that she's talking about, let's start with the documentary screening. I would like to mention that this is an international award-winning documentary that was produced by the Science Media Center IISER Pune team. So now we'll start with the screening of this documentary.
The early 1950s was a defining period for Indian science.
I hope all of you enjoyed watching the documentary, and I know there might be many feedbacks, suggestions, or insights on it, and we'll soon have a discussion for that. Um, right now, many people have joined again, like during the documentary screening. So. I would like to welcome all of you who have joined during the screening and on the behalf of the entire Science Media Center team. And I'm Neha Kanse. I've been working as a science communicator at the Science Media Center or SMC for the last 1 year. And it's indeed my pleasure to get a chance to introduce our team today on this occasion. So this project is not it doesn't complete over here. We have taken this ahead into a digital museum on GN Ramachandran. So that is the reason we have gathered here for the launch of the GN Ramchandran Digital Museum. So it is basically a homegrown collaborative project, and as you people could make out from the documentary, it is not just one person but many people who have been involved in it, be it scholars, be it several science enthusiasts, or even students. So it is basically a collaborative work of all these people that has led to a project of this kind. For the opening remarks of this event, I would like to invite our faculty coordinator, Dr. Shalini Sharma. So, as most of you know, Shalini is a faculty at the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences. And along with being involved with the GNR Museum, she is also a member of the Remember Bhopal Museum, a founding member of that museum, and also the Living Waters Museum at IISER. So, I would like to invite Shalini for the opening remarks.
Hello everyone, thank you so much for joining us today at the launch of the GNR Digital Museum. Both to people who are present in person here, but also friends who have joined us online. A big thank you to them as well. It is my immense pleasure to share this labor of love that has been nurtured by my colleagues at Science Media Center for over 2 years. You have seen they have taken slow but sure steps towards building a repository of educational material in different media formats. So the first was in form of a GNR film that you just watched, and very soon you will be taken through the tour of the GNR Digital Museum. I'm a social scientist, so I'm literally walking into the steps and the space that my colleagues, Professor Hari, as well as Professor Arnab Mukherjee created before me in terms of taking a leadership into this project. And so when I walked into this project, when the website curation was midway and the research was proceeding, I really asked myself, is this a story only of a scientist? Is this a story only of science? Or is there a larger message here? So I was given a crash course into GNR life and his work by my colleague Rahul, Vivek, who sat with me for hours and started explaining both the trivia and non-trivia related to his life and built my interest and curiosity. And that's when I started figuring out that actually GNR's story is much, much larger than a person. Usually when we make a museum, most of the time you will see the museum is centered around an event. But is this museum around an event? Are we celebrating just the big discoveries that GNR made? Are we celebrating the building blocks of different institutions that he set up? Or is this museum documenting a process? Or is this museum a personality-centered museum? We all know that in the newly independent India, most of the museums that were developed were either celebrating India in a way, or they were personality-centric. But if you look at the digital museum, you would find it is not a personality-centered museum at all. Because if it is, then we probably have failed GNR. Now the challenge before us in terms of this collaborative museum is, how do you really take the story of GNR not just to people who are interested in science, but also to people who are interested in what is happening to our society? And that's where we require your cooperation. So today's event is meant not only as a showcase of the project that we are working on, but also as a measure of self-accountability, are we on the right track? And an invitation to bring you on board into this collaborative museum to democratize this particular resource that we are working on. Through the next hour, you will find a lot of my colleagues coming on board. One, to put this museum in context of the field and discipline itself. My colleague will also give you a tour of the digital museum. You will also see how students in IISER Pune are already making interventions in terms of developing assets that can make the museum accessible to school teachers and people who probably are beginners into the field itself or may actually not know anything about it. So how to make this particular project accessible and interesting to them. But I think I would want to put forward this in a very simple way. Let's take it upon ourselves that these stories become salient. And through these stories, the facts about India, its tangible and intangible heritage also become salient and accessible to all of us. So a big round of applause for GNR, for his work and life in sciences. A museum that you do not want to institutionalize, although it has developed in the fertile space of a science institution. So we had a chat with Professor L.S. Shashidhara, whom most of you here know. Who better than him to basically talk about the museum and its context in contemporary times, especially from the perspective of science education, science communication, and institution building. He would have been here with us in person today, but we all know and we celebrated his new role as the director of National Center for Biological Studies. So give me a half a second so that I can confirm whether he's available online or not. Just have some patience. Not yet. So maybe because we were running a little bit late. So what I will do is we will bring Shashi a bit later, and I invite Rahul, whose introduction Neha would give before the next section.
I would like to mention that Rahul is an alumnus of IISER, and he is the director of the GNR documentary and also curator of the GN Ramachandran Digital Museum. So he's basically been part of the SMC team for the last 3 years now, and coordinating with the collaborators of the digital museum, creating content, and also putting up resources together for the documentary. So I would like to call upon Rahul to give us a tour of this digital museum on the website that we are going to launch today.
Hi guys. This is a project that has been a major part of the last 3 years of my life. And why did it all start is what I want to. So before giving you a tour of the museum, I'll give you a tour of why we are here. Okay. How did we get here? The story basically starts in sometime in 2017. I was not in the picture. When Vivek, in charge of the media center, and Dr. Madhusudan, Professor Madhusudan, were sitting one evening in SMC to transfer some assets over to the Science Media Center. So basically, these are a set of lectures by C. Ramakrishnan, whom, because you have seen the documentary, you now know who he was. And anyone who is in this field, structural biology, highly recommended that you should take a look at this. You can find this playlist on the IISER Pune YouTube channel. And while this access was being given to the Science Media Center to host this, Vivek asked, who is this person? And started to find out stories about C. Ramakrishnan. And which is where he found out this whole, the 1 year of calculations. At a time when we don't have modern computers or calculators, he took 1 year to do calculations by hand. And this amazed Vivek. And Vivek wanted to know, who is this guide who made him work for 1 year? Which is when he found out what exactly the 1 year went into, the Ramachandran plot and its significance. Every single protein that goes into the PDB. Right? So this is where Vivek is hooked onto the story. What Vivek now needs is a team that is going to make that documentary. He's already running in his head how he's going to tell the story. 2 years later, I joined as an intern. And separately, because I'd heard of the Ramachandran plot in courses in IISER, I start getting interested in the person behind the Ramachandran plot. And I thought, okay, for my 3-month internship, I'll make a 5-minute movie about G. N. Ramachandran. For this exact purpose, that people should know about the story behind the plot. Right? To my surprise, it turns out we have a network of close to, how many people did we have in the documentary? I think close to 17 people. And this network came all thanks to Professor Madhusudan. So that is where, through connecting with him, I then got in touch with people at the Molecular Biophysics Unit in IISc, MBU. Got in touch with people in Chennai. Got in touch with experts who are willing to join Zoom calls and give me interviews. Just based on the name GNR. Right? So they are willing to give me hours and hours of support, me an intern, who has no experience of making movies. They're willing to give me hours and hours of support to make a good documentary on GNR. So this is then where we also felt, yes, his story, these people want to tell. And we want to tell it too. Right? So it took us a year and a half. We got incredible support from our faculty coordinators and our deans, the IISER administration. And we faced many hurdles, but we got to the end. 1.5 year journey of making the documentary. And at the end of it all, because to some extent, because of my inexperience, because this was one of my first movies, we realized we had collected way more material than is needed for a 40-minute film. So what do we do with that? So that the solution for that is this website. Vivek's problem is, I don't want this 17 hours of material sitting in one hard disk in the Science Media Center. I want it to be open to all, because we asked scientists during their interviews for things that went way beyond the scope of the movie. But it's still very valuable information that can still be useful for the community, both for experts as well as for people who want to who are aspiring scientists. So Vivek now has this dilemma. Vivek also wants to take the documentary forward as, let's translate this into different languages so that it reaches a wider range of people. On that note, I'm pleased to tell you that in 2 languages we have drafts ready, and we are hoping to get in the process of dubbing them soon. And on the other note of what do we do with so much content, Vivek first thought, let's just put it on YouTube. It'll be open for all. Then another character comes in. This is my partner in making this website, my collaborator. His name is Alok Srivastava. And he's a historian of science. And he said that, okay, I'm very excited by SMC's vision of telling stories of the history of science alongside the stories of current research and where the research is applied. Right? So for this vision of telling history of science stories, Alok said, okay, why don't we work on this project where we make an organized way for these 17 hours of footage, and then we will use that as a seed for people to come contribute and develop an entire website which is only celebrating GNR, which also has historical value because you can see this one field of research grow in India thanks to him. And it will also be inspiring for practicing scientists and aspiring scientists to see that the struggles that they will face in science, how he dealt with them. Right? So we started doing that. This is, I think, almost a year ago. And few months later, Shalini ma'am joined our team as the in charge of the Science Media Center. We had called this a digital museum without as much thought. Alok and I called this a digital museum. But when ma'am came in, she said that, okay, a digital museum also means you have to keep putting the story out. So what are you doing for engaging more and more audiences? Because right now, we probably are only talking to undergraduates and experts in science. So how do we make resources to take the story of GNR to students at the stage where they will actually start thinking, should I do science or not? So those are efforts which we are still trying to get into. Right. So I gave a lot of background. I'm sorry about this. Now we are going to have a look at what the website actually is. So this is our documentary. You have had a look at it. This is who GNR is. And the digital museum, this is basically the vision that I've just described to you, what we want it to be. It is mostly in these 5 rooms. Let me just take you through the rooms of the museum. The first room is the life and career timeline, where you can just get in bit-sized points all the major events in GNR's life. Starting from his birth, he was born in Ernakulam. Anyone from near there here? Okay, we have one person. Then his undergraduate years, how his some of you would have interacted with that true or false outside, where we asked that GNR's father, how he trained him. So his father was a mathematics teacher who trained him deeply in mathematics, those years. Then the master's and doctorate here. The story of how C.V. Raman went to the electrical engineering department head and said that, you know, he's not fit for your department. He would be more useful in mine. So that, then the fact that there he decided to do a second PhD because he thought that, okay, with one PhD, even with the great C.V. Raman, he had questions, will I get a job in India? So he said, okay, I'll try to do a second PhD. And he went to Cambridge, which is where he got this biology spark. And so on. So this is basically, this is what this page is about, right? Apart from that, the second page here is just a celebration. All the people who we interviewed will have stories of GNR. So I think I can play one here to give you an idea of what this is. I mean, almost everyone in this room recognizes who this is, right? Yeah, so.
I myself have been have been fortunate to meet him a few times, and I'm very happy to say that he was the chairman of my selection committee when I was appointed as a scientist in CCMB Hyderabad. It was in 1981. At that time, as a candidate, I was asked what would I like to do, and I told that I would like to work on protein conformational isomerism. And for a moment, he just looked at me and he asked me to explain. When I started explaining, he went about, as the chairman selection committee, extending that to knowledge beyond what I could even think of. To such an extent, I could see a childlike innocence in his eyes. I can never forget that sight. He was so involved, and somebody had to remind him that he's the chairman of the selection committee and he should examine me rather than himself getting excited. He was a man of very high intellect. I had several occasions to talk to him and several things. I was very fortunate to do that, and he had his own sense of humor sometimes. And when someone in one of the meetings asked him, Ram, how do you prove the 2 points are in a straight line? He gave a very mischievous look at the person and he said, why do you require proof? It is so obvious, isn't it? So one could make out either he was dismissing the question or he was making it obvious answer.
So this is a clip I watch very regularly because it never fails to put a smile on my face. And this is what this page is about. Like, just stories that his students have about him, how they inspired him as a mentor. So these insights into what he was as a person and celebrating him is what this page is about. Then there are 2 pages dedicated to his research. There are a few other areas of his research which are quite significant, but until we are inviting contributions, and once we have those, we build it to a stage, we would probably, for example, have a 1 page dedicated to his work in medical imaging. But that needs to be done. So 2 of his science pages, the collagen work, the Ramachandran map work, in both of these. And then there is 1 page which just, talks about his role as an institution builder. Neha started the event by talking about C.V. Raman's impact by having students like GNR. GNR's impact by founding an entire field in India, and his students also we try to acknowledge. For example, in the collagen page, the science, the things that we are interested in, finding out more is, one, he gets motivated into the collagen structure. We saw the movie, we saw about Bernal. We also give enough space for Bernal, right, to have discussions around him, what he was like. So all the people who are involved in GNR story, Professor Naidama. So this is, I think, an interesting clip where Professor Ramasamy, who former secretary to the DST, he talks about, he considers both of them as his mentor figure. And when he was a student in CLRI, he interacted with both of them a lot. So this is something as a student of science I found very interesting.
And it turns out Professor Ramachandran had a strong emotional connect to the Leather Research Institute where I was at the time studying. It turns out Professor Ramachandran himself used to be the head of the Research Advisory Committee of the Central Leather Research Institute. In principle, he influenced the research projects in basic science in this institute. And the collaboration between his department and the Leather Research Institute is historical. You see, Dr. Naidama and Professor Ramachandran, same age group. One was born on 10 September, the other was born on October 22, 1922. They are very similar in age profiles, but they differ in the profiles of a scientist. Professor Ramachandran, in my opinion, today remains as a role model for someone interested in excellence of research and basic research, asking questions and pushing the frontier of science sideways into areas which are not known to the world. Dr. Naidama, on the other hand, is not a basic scientist. He's not a researcher of that class. but he connected science to society very well. He needs the problem, he knows the problems of society, and he understands the need of science to solve those problems. So they, in some sense, were like two sides of a coin, not facing each other, but together they make a composite coin.
So, I mean, the rest of it is elaborating on the same point. But this is, for me, is very interesting that they had a partnership. Two people who are approaching science from a very different way have a partnership, and they managed to have a successful collaboration. So, giving highlights to all the people around GNR's story, what was known before, how the scientific progression happened, what was there about collagen, why the previous structures were wrong. Then what did they solve? How did they develop their model? Here the inspiration, and you have seen this animation in the movie. Here, this is one thing we want to properly get the details of what happened in the controversy. So here I'll end this by highlighting one specific thing. Shalini ma'am mentioned that in the course of making this website, we have been getting a lot of support from some students. So one of the students who is now here has helped us make a brilliant animation, which has now gone up on the website. So this is just a perspective of where collagen is in your body. So Omkar here, who is here, has made this animation. And this is the potential of this project also. Like, there are skill sets I have developed in the course of this project. There are skill sets that the members of the IISER Pune community can develop by coming and helping us out with this. We are inviting the entire community to come and help us build this project, because at the end of the day, it is an IISER Pune project. The question that was raised by Professor Balram, why is IISER Pune interested, is because we want to recognize history so that we understand how we can solve today's science problems. So with that, yes, so I would like to then pass this to Professor Shashidhara, who will be joining us online for the chief guest address.
Sorry, I'm not any chief guest. I'm just a participant in the audience. So, the history and philosophy of science and is very important for all science students. But at IISER when it's conceived, we were discussing as an institution where the basic science and its research is integrated with undergraduate education. And it's more about the process of science and the process of discovery and scientific methodology, how the knowledge is verified, validated, and it progresses. That's more important to teach our students than specific content of physics, chemistry, math, or biology, particularly because we also set up this institution in 21st century where content of the knowledge is already available on a click of your mobile phone or computer. So in that context, it was very important for us to use the process of science in our pedagogical method while in undergraduate teaching. So if you all remember, when we, IISER Pune, the importance was given for undergraduate students to learn science by doing science in the laboratories or, a theoretical computational or experimental with the PhD students and faculty, and rather than sitting in the classroom and learning through lectures, right? Of course, that's also equally important, but equal importance, perhaps more importance, was given for research integrated undergraduate program. So in that context, history and philosophy of science, scientific methodology, and the process of verification and validation is extremely important. So very often, how do you even teach? How do you even sort of talk about history and philosophy of science without getting into too much of jargons, or make it easy to understand? Because people who want to pursue history and philosophy of science itself as a profession, or a major discipline of study, that's one aspect. The second is, you are going to become a practicing scientist, let's say. How much of this sort of you are imbibe naturally, without having to study history and philosophy of science the way the scholars study history and philosophy of science. And in that context, some of the works of the great people and what made them to discover what they discovered, and the process that went through, is very important. And it also involves some aspect of sociology of science, some aspect of sociology of scientific community, whether it's works of Ramanujan, or GNR in this context, is very important. So we had so far a couple of initiatives in this direction. This is a great initiative what our Science Media Center, particularly Rahul, Vivek, and Shalini, have put together. GNR's work as a museum, where it's like an online museum, a digital museum, where people talk about what went through in the times of GNR, which led to the discovery and the impact of that work, and how it has sort of withstood the test of time. This is very important for our students to understand this. We also earlier, prior to this, had tried to produce a couple of movies on Ramanujan and his works. Again, what led to some of his great works, and how it was made available to the public, and how it was what went behind in a acceptance of Ramanujan's work amongst the mathematicians of the world, and its, of course, applications in the modern days. So I think these are all the efforts which IISER Pune has put in. It's a great initiative, and really appreciate the people who worked on GNR's work. He's a big hero for all of us, not only for biologists, across all disciplines. If you talk about any major scientist of 1960s and 70s, they talk about GNR's work as one of the major landmark discoveries from India. And it's why we want to talk about GNR or Raman or Ramanujan. Why not similar kind of the stories on a scientist from Europe or USA? There are plenty of such stories already available on those work. But at the same time, there is also, as you mentioned, the sociology of scientific community is also equally important. How's the science and technology landscape in Indian context? So it's very important that we put together these kind of stories from India for Indian students. Some part of it is local context, but science is global. So they had to understand that while we pursue science in India with the help of certain kinds of colleagues, there's a lot of Indian culture which is associated with our interactions, but the outcome of science has to be global. It has to be accepted globally, because the science is universal. There is nothing like national boundaries around science. So this kind of a stories will help for students to understand the process of science, which has some local context. For example, teacher-student relationship is very Indian. At the same time, the outcome of GNR's work is very global, right? So I'll stop here. I think congratulations to Rahul, Vivek, Shalini, and everybody who's involved in this work. Thank you very much. Rahul?
And so I would like to now introduce my collaborator and the historian and philosopher of science, Alok Srivastava, who will explain why these histories. Why do we need to make such projects? Alok, over to you.
Is it possible to, like, with a show of hands, show me the audience as to how many undergraduates are there, how many biologists are around?
Okay, undergraduates
Like,
first.
biologists, raise your hands.
Okay, biologists. Biologists, raise your hands. I think close to 80% of the audience is biologists, not surprisingly.
So I'm going to read something. I'm basically in the same place as Shalini, that science is a human affair. It's a very human affair. And our subjectivities produce the interesting objects of science. And I'm going to somehow give you two interesting things, or three interesting things, right? First of all, history is the study of how futures are made, right? We record or write stories about history because that's how the future that we are living in was made. The second thing is a museum is an imaginarium. We swim in the rivers of the stories of the past so that we become mobilized to produce the stories of the future. And the third is a triple helical model for how scientists and science and communities of science are made. So I'll walk you through all three of these slowly. But here is J.D. Bernal being remembered by the first protein crystallographer that we know of, who we admire, Max Perutz. He gave us the structure of hemoglobin after something like 17 years of work in an institution set up by the person whose big achievement in protein structure was to give the structure of water. And structure of water is a crazy concept. So there's J.D. Bernal dealing with the weirdness of water when it gets organized. And he did this with the explicit understanding that if you are not able to extract the structure of water, you're never going to be able to extract the structure of any small molecule that is solvated or any protein. And here's Max Perutz. In 1936, after 4 years of chemistry at Vienna University, I took the train to Cambridge to seek out the great sage and ask him, how can I solve the riddle of life? The riddle of life is in the structure of proteins, he replied, and it can be solved only by X-ray crystallography. Just notice this is 1936. The Second World War hasn't exploded on Europe yet. Great sage was John Desmond Bernal, J.D. Bernal, a flamboyant Irishman with a mane of hair. Let me just show you mane of hair. That's him as a young man. That's his biography. So Shashi just mentioned student-teacher chains, right? And that's what Perutz is talking about. And so one of the things I just want to come back to you all for is, yeah, it's the story of humans producing human culture. It depends on intellectual leadership, imagination leadership, but also leadership in inspiring and supporting the next generation. And again, I'll repeat those three themes that I was bringing up. A museum is an imaginarium. History is the study of how futures are made. So I'll just come back to the triple helical model then, of how science communities are built. So if you take a look at J.D. Bernal, one of his big contributions was to write out histories. And it is something to appreciate that a person who did a lot of studies of history knew where to put in the labors to build the future. He built a department in London where crystallography of proteins was a school of crystallography of proteins was cultivated. He knew to spend his time doing structure of water in various conditions so that people like Max Perutz and GNR could do structure of proteins. And here I just want to come back and say, or what is the triple helical model of growth of science, right? Projects, people, and administrative leadership of communities. I mean, Shashi illustrates that. This IISER Pune illustrates projects, people, student teacher chains, and places where communities can be supported to do their work. GNR symbolizes that. So those are the three themes that I want you to leave with. And I am extremely grateful that Rahul got infected by my passion for the work that is their documentary work that Vivek and Rahul had collected so much that could be the basis of a forever imaginarium for future scientists anywhere in the world. Thank you. Rahul, back to you.
Thank you, Alok sir, for bringing up the perspective of scientific communities and the digital museum being imaginarium. So, moving ahead with this concept, projects like this sort do not end over here. This is just a smaller part of a bigger vision where we use these projects to spark conversations, and that the conversations that help us grow as a community, speculating from the past and learning from and taking into account the present situations. So now, based on this theme, we have a panel discussion. Um, the learnings from the life and science of G. N. Ramachandran and its impact on structural biology in India. For this panel discussion, I would like to invite the panelists for today, Professor M.S. Madhusudan. Please, sir. So, he is faculty at the Department of Biology, IISER Pune, and has been a major advisor on this project. Professor Harinath Chakrapani. He is also faculty at the Department of Chemistry, former Dean International Relations and Outreach, and I would like to mention that he is former faculty coordinator of Science Media Center and has been instrumental in this project. Gayatri Panangat, faculty Department of Biology, IISER Pune. Sai Krishnan Kayarat, faculty Department of Biology. Nagaraj Bal Subramanian, faculty Department of Biology again. I would now like to invite the moderator of our panel for today, Professor Arnab Mukherjee, Department of Chemistry, IISER Pune. Arnab sir has been our former faculty coordinator and closely involved in the project of the GNR documentary. Over to you, sir.
So it's my pleasure to actually have this discussion today. First, we started with a movie, and then we are extending that to a museum, digital museum. So now, what we want to understand from the panel that how this kind of museum will help in inspiring future scientists and how it connects to the present researcher and their daily life and their work, because it connects both science and life, right? So that in that context, first start with Professor Madhusudan, because here interestingly I can see three of the panelists are from same department as Professor Ramachandran, MBU department, and I am also from IISc. I did my PhD from SSU. So there is a good connection. So anyways, I'll start with Professor Madhusudan, that I came to know that of course also Rahul said that it was a kind of both of you and Vivek's idea to come up with such a movie. So I just wanted to know that why did you want to spread the story of GNR, and what outcomes do you foresee from this particular efforts?
Vivek has a nose for telling good stories. So this, like Rahul was mentioning, this came out in a conversation. And then a part of this was that there are not enough stories of this kind from our country. There are lots of such stories from other places, which I think Alok also pointed out, Shashi also said this. This is something that will inspire people who are in science, because the main people involved in making the Ramachandran map, studying the collagen structure, are all people who are under similar circumstances than us. Right? And so that is something that will serve as an inspiration. And if you go through all the details which is there in these digital repositories, the digital museum, one gets a better idea of what one can do and how their potential can be unleashed.
So, since you are, a bioinformatician yourself and you use computer and all that, so how do you think that this kind of, these stories or his stories or the museum is going to kind of influence or help or in a way in your research?
So one thing is that the Ramachandran story is striking in one thing, that you don't necessarily accept anything in science unless you question, and then you investigate or reinvestigate. It's called research for that reason, right? So and this was an exemplary situation where somebody pointed out, slightly unfairly, that a certain model was incorrect. So the easiest thing to have done was to say, yeah, okay, maybe these guys are all experts and maybe they're right, and it would have finished the story right there. But then there is this thing of trying to dig further,
Right.
and have a little bit of belief in what you're doing, and unearthing something which is important. And as you know now, any textbook has the Ramachandran map right in the beginning pages. And this would not have come
Yeah.
about had they just accepted
Right.
that somebody refereed the paper and junked their work, right?
So, yeah.
So that is one. The second is that, and this I'm not sure how much of it is in the movie, but I think it's there in some parts of the digital museum, is that one of the things the Madras group did, even it was a part of MBU that Sai and Gayatri were also part of, that you could freely disagree with your mentors, and in fact it was encouraged. I mean, nobody went and said you should go and disagree with someone, but that's part of the culture of the place, that you don't accept anything in the face value. So I think that is an important lesson for any budding scientist.
So now actually I'll come to Gayatri. So I know that you are a structural biologist, and basically in your courses, often Ramachandran. Of course, it will come as a part of it, right? So the thing is that, do you think that this kind of museum will actually help in teaching or inspiring the students, future scientists?
Yeah. So the concept of Ramachandran map, as all of us were mentioning, it's present in the first chapter of every biochemistry textbook, but still, it's also a place where like 99% or more, I would say, of the people who read it really do not understand when you look at the like even thinking in terms of what a torsion angle is. It's a very small percent in the world who understand it based on just reading the textbook. So the story really helps in terms of highlighting that actually this is a very simple concept. If you really think about it, it's as simple as a 3D jigsaw puzzle. So you are just thinking of how atoms fit in space. And so that's the fundamental concept which is involved in deriving. And it's as simple as saying that two atoms cannot be in the same place at the same time. So, or in a room, like there can't be two people sitting at the same place. So that's the fundamental concept which is involved in it. And these things become clear only when it is said through the whole story of how that map was derived at, and not by just reading the book. So when the book is read, it's a very complicated concept. If you ask any undergraduate student, I think the number of people who understand it when they read it is very, very less. So that's what I find it as significant. Another place where the concept of Ramachandran map always comes to us, say, as a practicing structural biologist, when we build a structure. So, like most of my students will know this. So, the last step, whenever it comes to building the structure, is validation or quality control. And so this is the information of the torsion angles is an information which does not go into the model when we build it. So it's a method of validation. So it's an information which has not gone into it, but then at the end of it, we need to make sure that every residue which is present obeys the rules which Ramachandran has
In fact, a lot
told.
of softwares also are there which can check nowadays directly.
Yeah.
Like I think
So they check and tell you whether it is correct or not, and it is left to you to actually correct it. And unless you have the model built correctly, your Ramachandran map is not going to be perfect. So GN Ramachandran actually reminds us to be perfect even now, and all structural biologists have to.
Yeah, it's amazing that now the same calculation which took them 1 year can be done in like 2 minutes time using a computer, right? So that's
Yeah,
really
so
amazing.
that's my view.
Yeah. So I'll just come in the same context to Sai, because you also I think teach, and you are a crystallographer who build model, starting from like all those things. So when you hear this story, does it some way inspire you in your work? And when you tell, teach the students, do you also teach them like from the context of history, that how they should look at those things in a different way? So I wanted to know your perspective on that.
I'd like to say that I did my PhD, and like I think Madhu and Gayatri, listening to all the stories, legendary stories of G.N. Ramachandran, of his science and of his emotional highs and lows. And so these were all stories that we used to get to hear on a day-to-day basis. And we used to listen, and so the bar that we used to see was really set high. And we knew what could be achieved in the context of Indian science and what we should be aiming for. Now, this is something that we got to see, we got to hear firsthand from seniors and teachers and supervisors who actually interacted with Ramachandran. At IISER Pune, the question of why this is relevant to IISER Pune. For students of IISER Pune who haven't seen a person like G.N. Ramachandran, this museum, this video, these discussions that have been going on presented in the video are what are going to show what a personality that Ramachandran was, not just as a scientist, but overcoming his own challenges that he had. And I mean, we all are facing challenges of different kinds. And his son, for example, was very forthcoming, telling of possible bipolar disorder that he was having and the medications that he was taking. But he never lost his enthusiasm for science, what he wanted to achieve, and what excited him. He never lost interest in that. He always, despite all his other emotional and mental issues. But I think that is something that we all need to get inspired by and learn from. All the challenges that we face, but what excites us should be pursued with great dedication, despite all the shortcomings.
So definitely, look, his stories is a kind of a lesson and reminder to all of us, the practicing scientists, that the challenges that were faced before, the same challenge still remains, because in the movie itself, mentioning in today's standard, it would be unethical at some point, right? But I don't know how much of that is true or not. However, the challenges still remain. So I would like to ask Nagraj about, how do you perceive and how do you want, because I know your enthusiasm in teaching and outreach activities and in many other aspects. So how do you foresee that this kind of museum and stories will actually in future will help inspiring future scientists, students to come?
My connect to GNR is the fact that I worked on this on collagen most of my life.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to ask you one thing
So I'm not a crystallographer like
but the
everybody
collagen,
else.
first of all, the structure was termed as wrong in the beginning because of the too close contacts, for which he did in the work on Ramachandran map and showed that they were not that bad. So later on, was it accepted?
Yeah, no, I think in the field of matrix biology, his work is still, quoted as the benchmark for this structure. And I think, I've had the opportunity to teach students abroad and teach in the area of matrix biology. And it's actually a very exciting thing to be able to quote his work as part of those studies, right? And Ramachandran plot is something that undergraduates across the world learn about, and you realize the significance. There are many occasions where, when you discuss the structure of collagen, you get asked, "Is this the same Ramachandran as the person who's under whom the Ramachandran plot is named?" So I think obviously his relevance to the field is enormous. But I think, as Sai and others have also said, I think the challenges that he overcame to do this, I think, is also very relevant in the context of science that we do even today.
Yes, that's what the thing.
So I think that for me is one of the highlights of a documentary or a museum like this, which puts together this information.
See, people may think right now that we don't have that same problem that we used to have before. That means we don't have to write a paper physically and then send it, post it, and will not know about the journals and all. Right now, we overcame those challenges. We have internet, Google, papers readily available to us, but still challenges remain. So, and these challenges take a different form and shape. So maybe
Yeah. So, and the other point I wanted to make is there are other stories to be told like this in the context of Indian science. My hope is this, museum and the fact that IISER Pune and Vivek and Rahul and Madhu have championed GNR's cause would also be an example for other institutions to maybe pick up, scientists whose work has not yet been highlighted or has not been catalogued this way. And it's an opportunity to say that if this is possible to do for GNR, we should be able to do this for other scientists as well.
Definitely, it has shown the path for future. So yeah, now I'd like to come to Hari. So I know that you were the science media center in charge at that point when it got initiated, and so basically, kind of, you also invested in this particular project of making a movie, and of course followed by this thing. So when what impact do you see in telling GNR story to researcher and students?
Okay, it's always difficult to go in the end because almost all the good points have already been made. So no, just kidding. But so when about the documentary itself, the experience was very interesting. That we didn't have much funding, so we had to pull through from some source or the other. We had to get some funding for it. This is a very low budget production actually. So we were able to somehow figure out. I told Rahul and Vivek, you don't worry, we will take care of it. So that is how it was. We somehow got things done and it went forward. So I'm very glad that it's turned out the way it has. But I think the inspiration for me, for why this story needs to be told, is there are a couple of things, So when you, like everybody has said, when you open a textbook, you see the Ramachandran map, and I always used to wonder why this did not get the accolades that one of the highest accolades that people in the scientific community get. And then I didn't get a very satisfactory answer for it. And so this documentary helped us understand at least one of the perspectives of what how that was. And I think it's an important and very powerful story for our younger scientists to know. I also think that this is like the classic story of somebody who's with a lot of disadvantage trying to fight a battle. And this is GNR's story. He's the guy who's sitting in Madras with very few resources. I mean, imagine those days, even to get dollars would be very difficult.
Yeah.
To buy anything or to get anything would have been very, very tough. I mean, some of those are true even today. But so it always was. I was thinking, how is it that he did this work? How was it that he was? So I think that story was also sort of something that came out, was highlighted in this documentary. And I mean, there's absolutely no doubt that the man was a genius. There's no doubt. But I think something that I felt was important, which also was highlighted in the documentary, and it hopefully will show up in the museum as well, is that he is as much human as any of us in this room. I think that's very important that we recognize that. But obviously, he's far more brilliant than certainly me. But it is complicated, and life is complex, and he's a living an example of that. And I felt that these things should be shared with the younger generation.
So both we shouldn't forget, apart from the somebody we are worshipping as a scientist, we shouldn't even forget the human side of it. Like everybody at the end of the day is human being. There are human problems, daily life that one has to lead, and some of that also was highlighted. And science was his job and his passion, and that he has done with such a high standard that it has set an inspiration for many scientists even today, practicing scientists today. So so we have heard from the panelists. We have very short time, so you could have gone on discussing more about that, but we understand that there is a lot to actually get inspired from in an everyday life of a scientist, and one has to look into both the human as well as the science aspect of personality. So with that, do you audience have any question for the panelist? Anybody? Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, for these very insightful comments. So this question is provoked by Gayatri's comments on the connection and everything. I think this is also something, it's a challenge that you have highlighted, which we as media practitioners and scholars face, which is how do you tell a story which can never be told through any one media format? And you basically hit the nail there, that it is not possible to tell and understand GNR only through a book or through an article or even through a film, and that's why they went into the museum. And now we're realizing that even through the museum it is not possible. So if as long as media is concerned, now we're looking at transmediality and how and where to take these stories through various actors, how do we generate more storytellers, and through what kind of message. So my question is basically open to everyone on the panel. Based on your own work and interaction with GNR's work and life, what would you suggest could be some of the things that we could do, possibly using any of the kind of media formats that you can think of, whether it is animation, whether it is song, art, or just a text? What would you highlight as a challenge for us in next, let's say, couple of months?
So I would say that see, right now we can build this museum, extend it further, bring other scientists, and in fact we can show success and failures of even the common scientist, so that people know that what are the things at hand. Like we only sometimes understand a personality or look at it when they're successful, but the struggle we never even have a chance to look at. But at the time when they're struggling, at the time they're growing, that is a time also one has to really look into. And if that is kind of that comes to common people, they will know the whole game, but not the final one. So anybody else wants?
So I think this is also related to the question which was asked to us, in the sense, why GNR? So I would think that any museum or a project like this which we have started, it should not stop here and not be a static resource. It should get populated more with, say, other advances in the field, and how actually history takes us to the future too. And not only that, so why I mentioned about the question of why GNR is, we should not stop at GNR. GNR is just an example, at least for a project of Science Media Center. We should definitely have many more such initiatives which are started, and the museum should be populated with more scientists.
Yeah, I agree with her. I think it has the potential to be that, and it has GNR has been the seed of this, and it will be terrific if this becomes an opportunity to kind of extend this. And there are many such stories to be told, right? And some are in Pune itself. So it'll be wonderful if if we can extend this that way. I also feel. It will be wonderful if school children in particular, the stories of scientists. I mean, there are many storytellers in the country now, and there is an opportunity for us to create very imaginative but very accessible, storybooks, if you want to call it them, which students have access to, and I have been looking to see if there is any on Indian science or scientists, and there are far and few of these. So if this becomes an opportunity to kind of get a booklet like that out, I think it then could also catalyze something that makes it accessible to students at that level. Because yes, there are, for somebody who is a scientist or is a student here at IISER and other places, I think the challenges that GNR is facing as a scientist are relatable. But if you want to tell these stories to kids in school and still make it interesting for them, I think we may have to do this slightly differently. So that could be something to consider.
I would like to add here that I think we can have a partial, if you are interested in taking the inspirations about life, making it more realistic, having a film on the life is something, I don't know how challenging it's going to be, but it's something that you can think. You already have a video on, Shashi mentioned Ramanujan. So something that can be added to your museum as a separate museum, or a hall of inspirers or something like that, who can inspire us all. But something that would really be also helpful in understanding what, like Gayatri mentioned, that we all talk about torsion angle sitting here, and many of us don't understand what it means. But there are, our own Science Media Center has programs like what Ashok and Chaitanya do on Sundays, and where concepts are taught to or conveyed to students, school students. And these are just hard ball and stick models, nothing more. And conveying that would be something that would be really taking it right to the students at a very early stage. If they get excited, they get excited. But the idea itself is, and building protein structures from plastic models. Yeah. There are so many things that one could do.
In the same line that one can put a separate room for games, basically the games through which they will also learn this.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask, so one of Ramachandran's biggest impacts has been creating a research environment that incentivizes good science. So I just wanted to ask the panelists that, what have been your learnings with your careers in research and what goes into building such an environment?
See, in general, the culture of research, like Venki had mentioned in the documentary as well, is what determines how successful or how nice, how good a place it is, the institution. So each group in the cohort has to have a positive culture of questioning, of being able to challenge each other. And so that GNR's philosophy has really permeated and helped many of us. I mean, I don't have any direct connection with GNR, but I can see through the documentary that these are foundational things that in many of our labs we have it quite well sort of entrenched. So, I mean, it is absolutely necessary. Otherwise, you're not going to make much progress in science.
I mentioned a little bit earlier that for a good scientific environment, the science should be what is termed disruptive, in the sense you probe something and you don't accept things on face value, and also even within a group there should be a lot of openness for debate. You should be able to disagree without animosity.
Agree to disagree. It's a famous saying.
I think that's more accurate.
It's a very common term that is being used, right?
Right. Because often egos are tread upon if you disagree, but the underlying thing is that the science is the bigger thing over here, getting to the truth. So that sort of, I think, puts a dampener on egos and stuff like that.
No,
would
I,
foster a
I,
better
I completely agree. So I think first and foremost point, in my opinion, will be the openness, because if somebody is afraid to speak up, against somebody else, it could be a junior person speaking against a senior, or a senior person speaking against advisor. The progress will be halted. Science will become mediocre, and then basically it will be a vicious cycle after that. I think what we learned from GNR, and also from many other scientists who are established in their own merits, that is the first point to start, and then of course you develop and take it further by not being satisfied what you have done, so you try to do more, and that insatiability that is there, the curiosity that drives you from inside, that only will just fuel the progress.
Hello, sir. Firstly, I would like to thank all the panelists that you're having such a good discussion. And I'm having a pair of questions. First is that I'm a first year undergrad student, BSMS. So for me, the first question is that how a researcher actually gains excellence in his work through the failures. Means though they are facing some time that is quite depressing for them, not getting the results, but then also what is the thing that maintains them to be a good researcher? This is my first question. And the second is that though you are having a wrong time, what is the thing that maintains you to be in your domain and to continuously fight for your result?
I wish I knew.
I think it's not very different in research. I think the answer to this question is not very different in research compared to any aspect of your life. So everywhere I think failure is the stepping stone to success, as is always mentioned. So even in research, I think it's your interest which keeps you going, and the hope that sometime you will get a positive result, which really and it's the interest which you have in pursuing what you want to see.
No, I think the interest, one of the reasons why this documentary and all of this is made is to inspire. So inspiration contributes to interest. So for example, any of us, we are all we're interested in chemistry or biology or whatever, but there are certain individuals or certain experiments or certain things that inspire you, and that keeps us driving. I mean, so you need to find whichever walk of life you decide. I think that's in my opinion, that would really keep you going. And then time doesn't matter. It may take 1 year, 2 years, as in GNR's case. It may take n number of years, but you still keep driving because you want to solve that problem. So that's in a nutshell. I think you need to find what your interest in, find individuals or things that inspire you and that keeps you going. Madhu?
So the fun really is in doing difficult things. Easy things anyone can do, and there is no sense of achievement if you do something that is easy that everyone else. So if you want to set yourself apart, you want to do something that is difficult. And if you try something difficult, then you will fail more often than you succeed. So I think you should be cognizant of this, that you're attempting something that is fun, that is going to give you satisfaction, but it's, it's not going to be easy. And there is a long history of people who have, there's the Bruce and the spider, and all these stories, that you keep doing it because ultimately, you will be rewarded. It's just a probability game after that, right? So uh, I think personally, I don't know how others feel, but personally for me, that's the motivating factor.
Add, I think failure also teaches you things. It's something that has not worked as you thought, but if it has taught you something in the process, then you use that to go to the next step. So I think if you view it that way, then there isn't anything negative in a failed experiment. It's taught you to do something better, and eventually I think when things work, it's on the back of everything that has not worked. So there is that element or that understanding over a period of time that you realize that you have to walk through this to get to what you're looking for.
My question is related to the same thing that is going on right now. The person who took whole 1 year to get the calculations done and get the result basically. So my question is, let us say at that point he did not have a lot of resources, and so he had to do all the calculation by hand and then plot the graph. At this point of time, let us say let's say anyone is solving a particular research problem, and they get stuck in a particular they know that it will take a long time to solve a part of the problem. Now, what should they do? Try to go, like, they know a particular method which will take a long time, let's say 1 year or 2 year, or like they should come up with another method which will solve the problem in a lesser amount of time, which will benefit two ways. First of all, I am getting the solution to the main problem that I was solving for, and also it devised a new method to like tackle that problem, that sub problem. So, and also, how do a person realize that should I be thinking over this thing or should I like do the work?
You want to answer that? It's a very good question. Everyone would like to answer that question.
Yes. So how I think about it is a very personal opinion. So I'm not that good at programming and thing. I can understand a program when I read it, that's it. But there are many tasks, if you really think about it, if a program is available, I can get the answer very quickly. That's exactly your question. If a program is available, I can get the answer very quickly. But if I sit and like CR sat and calculated for 1 year, if I sit and manually calculate it myself, I can also get it with equal accuracy. So now my dilemma is calculation of time. How much time do I take to write the program versus how much time do I take to manually calculate this? If I just have to do this once, I'm very happy doing this manually and not investing my time in writing a program. Whereas if I have the advantage of getting a program written is that if I want to redo this calculation by changing a small parameter, or if I have to do this for many more samples, it really helps to have a program in hand. So it depends what your question is, like what is your, so a balance between time versus are you going to revisit this again? So if you want to revisit this again and do it many more times, you might better invest time in writing this program rather than sitting and doing your calculation yourself. So this is what I was reminded of when you asked this question.
I think we'll hand it over to Neha.
This will go on.
Once again, thank you to all the panelists and thank you, sir. Now, I would like to invite our senior technical officer of SMC, Vivek Kannadi. Most of you already know him because nothing at SMC happens without his support. And for the GNR project also, be it the documentary or museum, he was a driving force for both these projects. So Vivek, please.
अज्ञानतिमिरान्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाखया चक्षुरुन्मीलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः. So the night blindness of my ajnana is opened by the gurus, whomever was sitting here or from the audience as well. I want to thank from the bottom of my heart for being part of the event, being part of the documentary, being part of building the website, the digital museum. I'm thanking you, all of you, the audience and people who were part of organizing the event today. We have tea and coffee arranged with a little bit of sweetness. We end the event. Thank you so much.